In this fourth part of the series, we'll explore text effects involving materials, styled lines, and layer styles. PaintShop Pro materials consists of textures, patterns, and gradients along with colors, of course. They can be accessed from several places, with the materials palette being the most common. Although we're focusing mainly on vector text objects, we'll also use a few raster layers for backgrounds. I'm now showcasing 3 scenes I've made up front, so we can use them for reference: Christmas time, neon, and metal. This fourth image shows a custom pattern I made, used in the metal scene. Hopefully we'll manage to recreate everything from scratch, in just one video clip. With the exception of the custom pattern we just saw, we'll only use standard materials, or free ones, which can be downloaded from the home screen. At least in the ultimate versions of PaintShop Pro. Let me quickly demonstrate in version 2020 Ultimate. Switch to the home screen and select Get More. Then scroll down until free content shows up, or use the free filter on the right. We are looking for the Creative Content Pack, which is not shown here because I've already installed it. All installed items are listed in my library, like so. Judging from the new sign in the top left corner, I guess this one has been updated. Since I also have it in PSP 2021, I won't update it here, but anyway, once you locate it, click on it, then hit the green Install button, and follow the prompts. Keep in mind that in PSP 2021, the Get More option has been changed to Store, but other than that, it's pretty much the same procedure. Okay, back to PSP 2021. Since we have lots to squeeze in a reasonably short video, I will not spend much time on topics we've already covered. Please make sure you have followed the previous parts of the series, so you can follow along. If you're watching on YouTube, you may also want to enable the English subtitles. Let's start with the Christmas time scene. It consists of a vector layer for the text object, and 2 raster layers for the background. The first background layer is filled with a leaves texture, while the second one at the bottom is filled with just a solid green color. We'll start with a blank 1920 by 1080 image, with transparent background, and I will introduce new concepts as we go. The first thing I should point out is that color, gradient, and pattern are mutually exclusive. This means that only one of them can be active at any given time. I guess we can think of any of them as the main material. Texture, on the other hand, can be combined with the currently selected main material by checking the Add Texture box over here. Materials are part of the color picker, so they can be accessed pretty much from any place that gives access to the color picker. Like the color swatches in the Properties dialog of vector objects, or the color swatches on the Option toolbar of vector text objects in Edit mode. Materials can be predefined and then used on demand. For example, right now we can see that color is set to yellow, gradient is set to antique copper, and pattern is set to wood tile 2. Texture is set to concrete, but it is currently hidden, because the Add Texture box is not checked. The color swatch itself shows the currently active material, which in our case is the yellow color. Remember that the upper color swatch corresponds to the left button of the mouse, while the lower color swatch corresponds to the right button. So I can fill my raster layer with the yellow color by using the Flood Fill tool and left-click my mouse anywhere inside the raster layer. As a quick note about the Flood Fill tool, I have set the match mode to none in order to avoid undesirable side effects. To fill the layer with a gradient instead of a solid color, I can switch to a gradient material in the color picker, then left-click my mouse once again inside the layer. It completely replaces the previous fill because the match mode of the Flood Fill tool is set to none. Similarly, I can fill the layer with a pattern. If all we want is to switch among the predefined materials, we can also use the first of the small icons below the color swatch, which is a drop-down list. The second icon is an on-and-off switch for the texture, but we'll talk about textures a little later. Provided that you have installed the Creative Content Pack we saw at the start of the video, there should be quite a few materials available to play with. We can also customize them or create our own from scratch, and then save them for later use. This is done from within the Color Picker dialog. For example, we can change the angle of the pattern. We can also scale it to get smaller or bigger tiles. Patterns are images usually made with repetition in mind, in which case they are called seamless patterns. Most standard PSP patterns are already seamless, but there is also a command for turning plain images into seamless patterns: effects, image effects, seamless tiling. Feel free to play with it. We can save custom patterns into default folders or custom ones in our hard disk, and then tell PSP where to look for them. This is done from File Preferences, File Locations. As a matter of fact, this dialog handles the location of all assets used by PaintShop Pro, but that's not the focus of this tutorial. Back to the color picker, we can use this little icon to access the Locations dialog, or we can select Resource Manager to manage our patterns. By the way, the categories listed under this drop-down list are existing subfolders inside the main pattern folders. A little later in the video, we are going to create and apply a custom pattern on the fly without even saving it. Compared to patterns, gradients have a lot more customization options. Besides changing their angle and repeats, we can also invert them. Furthermore, next to the preview thumbnail we can change the type from the default linear to rectangular, sunburst, or radial. Some of those types utilize center and focal points, adjustable either with sliders or directly on the preview thumbnail. Like the sunburst type, for example. The lower half of the dialog is used for creating custom gradients or modifying existing ones, but in this video we'll keep things simple. We'll just use the linear type of the antiqued copper gradient in the metal scene. However, feel free to experiment with all other options if you feel like it. We pretty much covered the basics about main materials, so let me now talk a little about textures before we start recreating the scenes. PSP textures are grayscale images, acting like transparency maps on the main material. Furthermore, they adapt to the color of the main material. This sounds quite technical, but let me explain it with some examples. Let me first clear the raster layer. Edit, Clear, or by simply hitting the Delete key on the keyboard. OK, good. Now let me open the Color Picker dialog and activate the blue spruce texture, like so. Notice that all textures listed in here are colorless. Next, notice the preview thumbnail at the bottom of the dialog. It shows the texture in a brownish kind of color. This is because the currently active main material is the antiqued copper gradient. We can tell from the color swatch preview in the materials palette. As soon as I commit the change, the color swatch in the materials palette gets updated too. Now let me fill the layer. Here it is. The texture filled the raster layer, and its color follows the shading dictated by the antiqued copper gradient. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Let me clear the layer again, and switch the main material to color. The preview thumbnail in the materials palette now shows the texture in yellow, as it should. And here is how it looks like when I fill the layer. For the sake of completeness, let me clear the layer again, switch the main material to pattern, and fill the layer one more time. Here we go. This time the texture got its color from the active pattern, which is the wood tile too. Not only that, but if I zoom in closer, we can see that it also picked up the pattern itself. These tile lines come from the pattern. By the way, when we're inside the color picker dialog, and we switch to a different main material, it becomes the active one. The preview thumbnail at the bottom of the dialog gets updated on the fly, while the color swatch in the materials palette gets updated only after we commit the change, by hitting the OK button. On a side note, these small color swatches in the materials palette always show the pure active foreground and background colors. That's the color tab in the color picker dialog. As a matter of fact, when we click on these small swatches we have only the color tab. On the other hand, the big swatches always show the end result when gradients, patterns or textures are involved. Let me now explain the transparency map nature of textures. We can already tell that no matter the main material, our texture creates fully transparent areas in the image. Moreover, different parts of the texture itself display different levels of transparency. It all depends on the gray variations in the texture. In a nutshell, total black translates to fully transparent, while total white translates to fully opaque, with intermediate gray shades producing different levels of transparency. If you're familiar with masks, it is the same concept: black conceals, white reveals. I'm not sure why, but using textures with the flood fill tool causes the none state of the match mode to not replace completely the previous fill. That's why I always clear the layer before refilling it with a texture. Depending on the texture transparency levels and the main material color, the final looks may vary significantly. For example, using our yellow as the main material, we see that the blue spruce texture becomes pale and flat. In this case, a darker color improves things quite a bit, like so. To make it stand out even more, we can add a new raster layer, move it below this one, and fill it with a very dark solid color, without any texture. Notice how much better it looks, with pure black. Let me now quickly change the color of our main material, and the color of the underlying layer, to something closer to our Christmas time scene. And just like that, we created almost the same background of that scene. I said almost, because if we take a closer look at the original scene, we notice that the texture is more vivid, with a three-dimensional depth on it. I'm not sure how apparent it is in the video, but there is a big difference due to the layer style of the raster layer in the original scene. We've already used layer styles in previous parts of the series, mostly for adding drop shadows non-destructively. You may want to review them and come back. Okay, back to our scratch image. Here we use layer styles to produce a 3D-like effect, again non-destructively. The style we are looking for is called Bevel, and as you can see, with the default settings it produces a very strong effect. There are quite a few adjustments to experiment with, until we get satisfied. The sphere in the middle is interactive, controlling the direction of the light source. Alternatively, we can use the sliders of the XY fields, or use their boxes directly for fine adjustments. With the color picker, we can change the color of the light, which can also get sampled from the current image, or any open image if we switch out of the tab Documents mode. As I'm time-lapsing right now. Alright, back to tab Documents, and into the Layer Styles dialog again. The size adjustment controls the bevel span from the edges of the layer, but in this case our pine leaves are not wide enough, so we need to really push the slider before we notice big changes. Opacity controls the strength of the overall effect on the raw data of the layer, including the defined color of the light source. So among other things, having the opacity set to 100% will also affect greatly the original color of the layer. That's a thing you should always keep in mind. Trying to manually replicate the texture bevel of the original scene is fine, but here I will simply copy the layer styles from the original scene. Right-click on the texture layer in the original scene, and select Copy Layer Styles. Then switch to the scratch image, right-click on its texture layer, and select Paste Layer Styles. Here we go. This function is available only in later versions of PaintShop Pro. I think it was introduced in version 2020. If you're using an older version, you can use an alternative method. Save permanently the layer style as a preset, then apply it on demand to any layer, at any given time. Let me first reset the styles and demonstrate that alternative method. OK, in the original scene, open the Layer Styles dialog of the texture. Click this small disk icon, and give your preset a name. Let's call it Blue Spruce Green Bevel. Now back to the scratch image, open the Layer Styles dialog of the texture, open the Load Preset list, and select the desired preset. And that's all there is to it. Layer styles treat transparent parts as boundaries. Since our texture is transparent around pretty much every pine leaf, they all got affected individually. Now let me reset the styles, and then replace the transparent areas with a solid color. In our case, this can be done quickly by simply merging the two layers. Good, no transparent areas anymore. I will now apply a bevel style to this merged layer. The result is quite different, but I hope it makes sense. So that's another thing we should keep in mind when it comes to layer styles. Okay, we are now done with the background of the Christmas scene, so we can move on and recreate the vector text. Creation of text vector objects has been already covered in previous parts of the series, so you may want to review them first, and come back. Okay, we already know that the upper and lower swatches in the materials palette correspond to the stroke and fill color of text objects respectively. As we're about to find out in a little bit, this also works with materials. Let's start fresh, by resetting the swatches to plain black and white colors, with this little icon over here. Okay, good. I'm now switching to the text tool, where I can predefine the attributes on the text options toolbar. Arizonia font, 440 points, solid white fill, bold style, left alignment, smooth anti-aliasing, solid black 3.5 pixels stroke, as vector, 0 leading, 0 kerning. Click inside the image, type in the text, apply, and then center in canvas. And here it is, nicely put on its own vector layer in the layers palette. As expected, it was created with black stroke and white fill, but we can easily change the fill, for example, to a gradient or to a pattern. And of course, we can always add a texture on top of the main material. It is really as simple as that. The same thing for the stroke. Let me first make it thicker, and maybe also change the line style to something more fancy. I can now change its main material from solid black to a gradient, or to a pattern, and even add a new texture on top. So in our case, we can recreate the text of the original scene by inspecting its attributes, and adjust our text accordingly. For example, the fill color of the original text. It consists of a solid red color as the main material, with the carpet texture on top, scaled down to 53%. Back to our scratch image. A couple of clicks. A few adjustments. And here we have it. The same can be done for the stroke, but there is a faster way. Just like layer styles, text attributes can be collectively saved as a preset, and then get applied to any other text, at any given time. In the original scene, first select the text object with the text tool. This should update all text attributes in the user interface to those of the selected text, but probably due to some bug in recent versions, that's usually not the case. Most of the times PSP misses some of those attributes. Anyway, as a workaround or even as a precaution, enter the text edit mode, then use the zoom once or twice, type in a letter and delete it. Then hit the apply button. This should force an update of all text attributes. Okay, with that out of the way, open the text presets list over here, and then click on the small disk icon. Give it a name, let's call this one My Christmas Font, and click the OK button. The new preset should now appear in the list, like so. By the way, we can manage our text presets in the Resource Manager dialog by clicking on this small icon over here. All we have to do now is to go back to the scratch image, select the new text object with the text tool, and select My Christmas Font from the presets list. We still lack the 3D looks and the drop shadow, but that's because those are layer styles I've applied to the vector layer in the original scene. A few minutes ago, we saw how to quickly copy those too. Right-click on the original layer, and select Copy Layer Styles. Then right-click on the new text layer, and select Paste Layer Styles. By the way, the 3D looks of this text are due to the Emboss style. It works similarly to Bevel, but without letting us define a color for the light source. And here are the settings I used for the drop shadow. Nice, we have successfully recreated the Christmas time scene. In the description below, you'll find a download link for the original file, in case you want to practice what I showcased. The plan was to squeeze all 3 scenes in just one video, but it got way too long already. I'll have to make a separate one for the neon and the metal scenes, my apologies for that. Until then, please stay safe.
Thank you for watching.